She was drenched in blood, but there was no wound. August 10th, 1993. Deep in the forests of southern Siberia, a group of Ukrainian kayakers drifted silently down a remote river near the base of the Khamar Daban mountains. The air was clean. The sky was a perfect sheet of blue. Nothing in the wind, the trees, or the water warned them that they were about to witness one of the most chilling moments in modern wilderness history. As they turned a bend in the river, they saw her, a teenage girl standing motionless at the edge of the tree line, caked in dried blood, her face hollow, her arms hanging limp at her sides. Her feet were bare, her clothes torn and clinging to her body, and her eyes, those eyes, were locked onto them with a vacant, inhuman stare. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply existed, like something the forest had decided to spit out. Her skin was swollen from insect bites, her lips cracked from dehydration, her body trembling not from the cold, but from something else entirely. What she would eventually tell investigators is the kind of real survival story that nightmares are built from. Hallucinations, sudden screaming, blood from the eyes, bodies convulsing and dropping like puppets with their strings cut. It sounded like a horror movie. But this wasn't fiction. This wasn't folklore. This was real. In the days that followed, the Soviet-era rescue response moved with an eerie slowness. By the time helicopters arrived, it had been 19 days too late. What they found shocked even hardened search veterans. 6 bodies scattered across a mountainside, twisted in unnatural positions, some partially unclothed, all apparently dead from hypothermia, except for one, the group's leader who had suffered cardiac arrest. And yet none of it made sense. The group was experienced. Their equipment was intact. They had survived worse conditions before, and why did Valentina live when the others died so fast, so violently? That question lies at the heart of what has now become known as Russia's Dyatlov Pass 2.0, a wilderness horror story still without an ending. Over the next 28 minutes, we'll unravel what really happened during that doomed expedition. We'll follow Valentina's account, cross-examine the forensic reports, and explore the theories, ranging from natural disasters to chemical weapons, from toxic fungi to Soviet-era nerve agents. This is not just an unsolved mystery. This is a real-life horror, a wilderness case file, and a glimpse into how fragile the human body and mind become when nature, or something else, turns against you. This is the Khamar Daban incident, and once you hear what really happened, you may never look at a forest the same way again. She was not someone you wanted to disappoint. Lyudmila Korovina, 41 years old, was more than just a hiking instructor. In the old Soviet athletic system, she held the rare and respected title of Master of Sports, a designation reserved for elite survivalists, the kind of people who could outwalk a blizzard or build shelter in a rock slide. Her students at the Petropavlovsk Azimut Tourist Club both feared and revered her. She was tough, uncompromising, and relentlessly focused on one thing: turning young amateurs into wilderness warriors, the kind who didn't panic when things went wrong, the kind who knew that in the Siberian wild, panic doesn't kill you slowly, it kills you instantly. Lyudmila had been training outdoorsmen since the early 1970s. She knew the Khamar Daban mountain range like a second home. It was a place of beauty, yes, but also a place of sudden, silent death. Towering above the southern reaches of Lake Baikal, the deepest freshwater lake on Earth, the range stretched across the Republic of Buryatia, a jagged labyrinth of steep ridgelines, hidden passes, and mist-choked valleys. For ordinary tourists, it was treacherous. For Lyudmila, it was perfect. Every rockfall, every gust of wind, every hidden slope was a chance to teach her students what nature could really do. She believed that strength wasn't something you found. It was something the mountain took from you and gave back, sharpened. That summer, in August of 1993, she assembled what she considered her finest team yet: 6 hand-picked hikers, each trained under her brutal standards. These weren't beginners. They were young, fit, and mentally hardened. Most had been through dozens of survival drills and week-long treks with Lyudmila. They trusted her with their lives, and that trust would soon be tested in the most unimaginable way. At 23, Alexander Sasha Kresin was the oldest of the group and had a bond with Ludmila that bordered on familial. He had impressed her time and again with his resilience during previous expeditions. Tatiana Filipenko, 24, was both physically strong and intellectually sharp. She was the type who volunteered for the hardest tasks. Denis Shvachkin, 19, was quiet, eager, and determined to prove himself, especially under Ludmila's demanding eye. Then there were the younger members, 17-year-old Valentina Utochenko, who would soon become the group's sole survivor, 16-year-old Victoria Zalesova, agile and clever, and 15-year-old Timur Bapanov, small for his age but remarkably enduring. Together they formed a kind of elite wilderness unit, tight-knit, fearless, and bonded by months of shared struggle. There were no weak links, no unstable personalities, no signs of recklessness or emotional volatility. Just a group of promising young hikers and one battle-hardened mentor, ready to test them against the elements. On August 2, 1993, they arrived by train in the small mountain village of Merino. It was the perfect launching point for their 6-day hiking loop through the upper country. The weather was cooperative, calm skies, stable air pressure, and a forecast calling for nothing but clear days. Everything was in their favor. Even better, Ludmila's daughter, Natalia, was leading a second hiking team on a nearby parallel route. The two groups planned to rendezvous on August 5th for a shared meal and stories. It was a reunion that would never happen. Their route was ambitious but not unrealistic for a group of this caliber. From Merino, they would follow the Langutai River, pass through the Langutai Gates, ascend the rugged trails along the Bunyok-Katsuk River, and summit Retransla Peak, 2,396 meters above sea level. From there, they would descend toward the meeting point with Natalia's group. It was supposed to be a victory lap, a final test to show they could handle real alpine adversity. And for a while, everything was perfect. The team moved fast, so fast, in fact, they were ahead of schedule by the second day. They made excellent time across the lower ridges and into the steep ascent. Spirits were high. Food supplies were untouched. Equipment was functioning well. The group had even joked about catching Natalia's team by surprise by arriving a day early. They were young, invincible, and unknowingly walking towards something that would scar Russian wilderness history forever. The storm came on August 4th. There was no warning, no gradual shift, just a sudden violent collapse of the sky. Winds howled down the ridgelines. Freezing rain slammed into their packs and faces. Visibility vanished. The temperature plunged below zero. They were just below the summit of Retransla Peak when it hit, and they had a decision to make: push forward or seek shelter. And here is where the first mystery begins. Ludmila Korovina, the veteran, the master, made a choice that still puzzles survival experts to this day. Despite being close to forest cover, she instructed the group to set up camp in an exposed clearing. A risky move, especially given the storm's intensity. Some speculate the group's gear had begun to fail, becoming waterlogged and heavy, making rapid movement dangerous. Others believe she was trying to push through one last hardship to finish the route on time. Whatever her reasoning, they pitched their tents in the open, soaked to the bone, unable to start a fire. They would survive the night. But what waited for them the next morning wasn't recovery. It was something far worse. Something no one, not even Ludmila, could prepare for. Something that would strike without warning and leave only silence. They broke camp at first light. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a shattered stillness across the mountainside. The sky was overcast but clearing. There was no reason to panic. No one was injured. Their summit of Retransla Peak was complete, and only a descent remained, a routine finish for an expert group like this. Spirits were cautious, not fearful. They were wet, tired, and cold, but not desperate. They believed the worst was behind them. They had no idea that the real horror hadn't started yet. What happened next has never been fully explained. Not by investigators, not by forensic scientists, not even by the sole survivor, Valentina Utochenko. But it was she who would later describe, in broken fragments, what unfolded on that mountainside. A story so surreal, so violently impossible, that many questioned whether trauma had fractured her memory, or whether it had preserved a truth too terrifying for logic to accept. They were walking single file, descending along a slope not far from where they'd camped, when the first scream tore through the fog. It came from the back of the line. Alexander Sasha Kryson. Valentina turned just in time to see him collapse to his knees, convulsing. Blood poured from his eyes, from his nose. His mouth foamed. He was screaming, but the sound was raw, gurgled, inhuman. Within seconds, he was motionless. Ludmila, their instructor, so often a portrait of control and command, rushed to him. And then it happened again. She, too, began to tremble violently, clawing at her own chest as if trying to rip something out. Blood streamed from her ears. Her eyes rolled back. She fell forward onto Sasha's body and didn't move again. Tatiana Filipenko, calm, strong, dependable Tatiana, dropped to her knees beside them, but instead of helping, she began slamming her own head against a nearby rock, over and over as if trying to escape something inside her skull. She screamed once and then went limp. In the span of barely a minute, 3 people had died. Violently, inexplicably. The others, Dennis, Victoria, Timur, began to run. But whatever had struck down the first 3 moved faster than panic. Valentina watched them fall one by one, each tearing at their clothing, gasping for air, vomiting blood. They clawed at their own skin, at the ground, at the sky. One screamed until his throat gave out. Another simply collapsed and lay twitching. There were no warning signs, no external threat, no predator. Only death. It was as if the mountain itself had turned on them. Within 6 minutes, 6 people were dead. Valentina was the last one standing. She doesn't remember running, but she did. She doesn't remember where she slept that first night. But somehow, she survived. No fire, no food, no map. Just raw instinct and cold terror. For a full day, she stayed hidden in the trees, trying to convince herself it wasn't real. Then, against every survival instinct, she went back. Back to the clearing. Back to the bodies. They were still there, exactly as she had left them. Still twisted, still lifeless, their eyes frozen open. Some of their clothes had been torn off, scattered across the rocks. One of them had no shoes. Another still had blood pooled in the crook of his arm. Valentina forced herself to move. She took what she needed, gear, water, food, and left. For the next 4 days, she wandered, following distant power lines, drinking from streams, limping across rough terrain with torn feet. She had no plan, only one goal: get out. And then, on August 10th, she appeared at the riverbank, filthy, barefoot, bleeding, and alive. The kayakers who found her would later describe her as not human. Some claimed she was covered in blood, others said she screamed, others said she said nothing at all, but what all of them agreed on was this: she looked like someone who had seen something no one should see, and survived. Valentina was taken to a local police station. She gave her name. She said her friends were dead. But the full story wouldn't come out. Not right away. Not completely. She slipped into what doctors would later describe as a protective state of shock, a defense mechanism so deep it blotted out full speech, full memory, and all hope of clarity. And as the days passed, no one came looking for the others. The rendezvous with Natalia's group had come and gone, and still no alarm had been raised. It wasn't unusual, after all. In post-Soviet Russia, hiking expeditions sometimes went days without contact. The region was remote, communication was spotty, and Ludmila was known as one of the best. No one suspected that her entire group had been wiped out. It would take 19 days after the deaths, before any official search would begin. And by then, the mountain had grown cold again, silent again, as if nothing had happened, as if it had already begun to bury its secret. What investigators would find next only deepened the mystery. The bodies were still there, but the evidence surrounding them made even less sense than Valentina's account. There were no weapons, no injuries consistent with attack, no footprints of an intruder. and nothing in the environment, at first glance, seemed dangerous. But as they examined the site more closely, what they didn't find may have been even more unsettling than what they did. There were no animals, no birds, not even insects, and in a Siberian forest in the heart of summer, that should have been impossible. She shouldn't have survived. Not after 4 days alone in the Siberian wilderness, not barefoot, not without a map, shelter, or support. And certainly not after watching 6 people die in a way that defied every law of biology. But somehow, Valentina Utochenko did survive. And when she stepped out of the tree line and onto the riverbank that August morning, she didn't look like a person. She looked like a question that no one could answer. The kayakers who found her were stunned. They'd been gliding down the river in silence, enjoying what should have been an ordinary summer day. And then, there she was, a girl standing at the edge of the water, unmoving. Her face was pale and swollen with insect bites. Her clothes hung off her in tatters. Her feet were torn open, raw from days of walking over rocks and thorns. Her eyes were blank, hollow. She didn't speak. She didn't wave. She just stood there, staring through them as if they didn't exist. One of the kayakers later said, "It felt like the forest had pushed her out, like it wanted someone to find her." What they didn't know was that Valentina had been running from more than the wilderness. She had been running from memory, from images burned into her brain, from the way Tatiana's skull had sounded against the rock, from the gurgle in Sasha's throat, from the moment she realized she was the last one left. Her mind had done what it had to do. It had buried the horror. They brought her to the nearest police station, where officers tried to make sense of what they were seeing. A teenage girl, half feral, covered in bruises and dried blood, claiming her entire hiking group was dead. It sounded insane, impossible. It sounded like trauma had turned her into an unreliable witness. But the terror in her voice, when she did speak, was unmistakable. And there was something else. She never asked if anyone else had survived. She already knew. Authorities filed a report, but it didn't trigger immediate action. This was 1993, just 2 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. The region was still adjusting to post-Soviet dysfunction. Resources were limited. Bureaucracy was tangled. There were no helicopters standing by, no national headlines, just a traumatized teenager and a vague story about death in the mountains. In most countries, her testimony would have launched an emergency response. In rural Siberia, it launched a waiting game. It wasn't until August 24th, 19 days after the original tragedy, that a search was finally mobilized. Even then, it took 2 more days before helicopters could locate the site Valentina had described. She'd been unable to provide precise coordinates. How could she? She had fled in terror, without gear, without direction. The rescuers had only the vague shape of her story and the impossible conviction in her eyes. What they found was worse than they had imagined. In a shallow depression beneath an upper slope, 6 bodies were discovered, scattered, contorted, and lifeless, all within 50 meters of each other. Some lay face down. Others were twisted into fetal positions, arms frozen in mid-motion. Clothing was missing, shoes were gone. A few had jackets partially stripped off, as if in the act of removing them mid-panic. One body was completely barefoot, yet none showed signs of a struggle. No bullet wounds, no knife marks, no broken bones consistent with an external attack, no animal bites, no signs of avalanche or landslide. It was as if they had died from something inside them. The bodies were flown to a morgue in Ulan-Ude. Autopsies were performed. The official conclusion? 5 had died from hypothermia. 1, Ludmila Korovina, had died from a sudden heart attack. And while that seemed to explain the surface of the tragedy, deeper layers told a different story. All 6 bodies had bruised lungs, a possible sign of acute respiratory failure. 2 showed elevated levels of urea in their systems, hinting at physical breakdown or kidney malfunction. Some had signs of protein starvation, but they had only been in the wild for a few days. Their supplies had been adequate. The group had been healthy, strong, trained. How had their bodies deteriorated so fast? There was blood in the stomach contents of multiple victims, foamy fluid in their airways. One showed cerebral trauma consistent with a violent fall, but without the injuries that should have come with it. The pathologists made careful notes. Unexplained physiological stress, one wrote. Another labeled the findings atypical for hypothermia. And then there was the site itself. Rescuers noticed an absence of something vital. Life. There were no birds, no insects, no animal tracks, no sounds. It was mid-August, Siberia's peak of life and motion, and yet the clearing felt abandoned by nature itself. That silence, that vacuum, would haunt the search team far more than the bodies did. Valentina, meanwhile, had been moved to Irkutsk and placed under the care of trauma specialists. Her physical wounds were healing, but psychologically, she was fading. After her initial statement, she stopped talking. She gave no interviews. Her name disappeared from the news. Her family relocated. For the next 25 years, she would say nothing, not one word, until 2018. That year, a journalist tracked her down. She was living quietly, married, far from Buryatia. At first, she refused to speak. When she finally did, what she said contradicted pieces of her original story. No blood, no screaming, just death. Sudden, silent. Those contradictions ignited new debates. Had she repressed the memory, or had she changed her story? Trauma experts argued that extreme stress can rewrite memory like static corrupts a tape. Others believed she had simply told the truth as she remembered it. Once. But if she was unreliable, why did the physical evidence mirror her words so closely? And if she was accurate, then what exactly killed 6 experienced hikers in the middle of the day, under calm skies, without a sound, without a struggle, and without a trace? The answers, or lack of them, would only grow stranger from here. Because once investigators started looking at the how, they also began to wonder about the why. And that's when the theories started to emerge, each more disturbing than the last. What killed them? That question has haunted investigators, survival experts, and armchair theorists for over 3 decades. Because no matter how many times you look at the facts, 6 dead, no sign of struggle, no external wounds, 1 survivor, the logic just doesn't add up. This wasn't just a hiking accident. This wasn't just hypothermia. Something else happened in those mountains, and the deeper you dig, the more the lines between reality, science, and nightmare begin to blur. The official theory, of course, is the simplest: hypothermia. The group, caught in a sudden Siberian storm, succumbed to the cold. The confusion, the irrational behavior, the torn clothes. It could all be explained, they say, by the final stages of exposure. Paradoxical undressing is a known phenomenon. Victims of hypothermia sometimes remove clothing as their body misinterprets cold as heat during neurological breakdown. Hallucinations, convulsions, and erratic movement can follow. It's tidy, clean. But there's just one problem. Valentina's story doesn't match that version. She didn't describe slow confusion or shivering. She described blood from the eyes, foam from the mouth, violent seizures, and a woman smashing her own skull against a rock. None of these are standard signs of cold exposure, not even in extreme cases. And then there's the silence. No cries for help, no disorientation spread out over time. Everything happened in minutes, like the mountain flicked a switch. So if it wasn't hypothermia, what was it? Some believe the group may have unknowingly ingested toxic mushrooms. In Siberia, wild fungi can be deadly, especially if mistaken for safe varieties. Certain strains contain compounds that induce hallucinations, seizures, and internal bleeding. It's possible that a contaminated breakfast could have triggered mass psychosis and internal breakdown. But there's a problem with that theory too. The autopsies found no mushroom traces in the stomachs. And Ludmila, a trained survivalist with decades of experience, was known for her caution with foraging. Others have proposed something even darker: nerve agent exposure. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union developed some of the most dangerous chemical weapons known to man, among them the Novichok family. These agents can cause respiratory paralysis, convulsions, foaming, and internal bleeding in seconds. The symptoms align disturbingly well with Valentina's account. Some versions of the theory suggest that the group stumbled upon an old Soviet testing site. Others believe contaminated water, perhaps from Lake Baikal, long rumored to be a dumping ground, could have carried trace amounts of a forgotten bioweapon. But then again, why would only one group be affected? Why not Natalia's team nearby? A related theory suggests aerial contamination, something carried by wind or rainfall, a chemical experiment gone wrong, a cloud of death moving silently through the mountain air. But no residues were ever found, no unusual readings, and no cause ever formally listed in government files. If there was something unnatural in the air, it left no trace. Then there's the theory few dare to say aloud: infrasound. A naturally occurring phenomenon, infrasound is created when strong winds pass through mountain corridors and generate low-frequency sound waves, too low to hear, but powerful enough to affect the human brain. Documented cases suggest that prolonged exposure to infrasound can induce panic, nausea, hallucinations, and, in rare cases, cardiac arrest. Could the Khamar Daban range, under just the right storm conditions, have created an acoustic death trap? It would explain the sudden terror, the senseless behavior, even Ludmila's heart attack. But there's no instrument data, no wind models. Just a chilling coincidence. The same infrasound hypothesis was floated in another case, the Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959, where 9 hikers died under equally bizarre conditions. In both cases, experienced trekkers, sudden chaos, twisted bodies, and no clear answer. The parallels are hard to ignore, but if all of those theories feel incomplete, that's because they are. Every theory solves part of the puzzle, but none solve all of it. Hypothermia explains the torn clothes, but not the bleeding. Nerve agents explain the seizures, but not the lack of contamination. Infrasound explains the panic, but not the foam or the silence of the forest. The deeper you go, the more it feels like the mountain is playing a game with us, offering just enough truth to keep us asking questions, but never enough to find peace. And then there's the detail that gets overlooked far too often. Why was Valentina unaffected? She drank the same water, ate the same food, slept in the same tent, breathed the same air. If it was environmental, shouldn't she have died too? If it was chemical, shouldn't it have hit everyone at once? Was it chance, genetics, or something else? Some online theorists suggest something chilling, that she survived because she wasn't the target. That idea opens doors better left shut, that perhaps the group didn't stumble into danger, that something was waiting for them, watching them, that only one was allowed to leave. But speculation can only take us so far. The Russian government never reopened the case. The forest never spoke again. And Valentina, she disappeared into silence, except for one brief moment, one quiet conversation. In 2018, when she gave her final interview, she ended it with a phrase that no one could forget. There was something in the air. Just 6 words. 6 words that reopen every wound, reignite every theory, and bring us to the heart of the mystery. What did Valentina survive? And why? Because while most theories focus on how the group died, the real question, the one no one has ever truly answered, is this: why was she the one who came back? And to answer that, we have to go back to the recovery site, to the position of the bodies, to the missing wildlife, to the signs no one could explain. Because what the investigators found next wasn't just confusing, it was impossible. When investigators finally reached the scene, they weren't prepared for what they found. Not just because of the bodies, by then, they had braced themselves for death, but because of everything else. Or rather, what wasn't there. The mountain clearing where 6 young people had died was too quiet, too sterile, too untouched. For a Siberian forest in the middle of August, it should have been teeming with life, insects, bird song, animal tracks. But the search team reported nothing. Not a single crow circling above. Not a single footprint apart from the victims. No scavengers, no movement, no noise, not even decay. It felt, one rescuer would later say, like nature had hit pause. The bodies lay in strange positions, one curled as if asleep, another with arms flung wide like a scarecrow. Some had their mouths open, frozen mid-breath. Clothes were scattered, ripped, disheveled, missing entirely in places. Several victims were barefoot, despite freezing temperatures. Their gear was intact, their food supply untouched, and their packs neatly stacked. There was no sign of a struggle, no trace of external violence. And yet, something had killed them with terrifying speed. Something unseen. Something that didn't leave fingerprints, but did leave questions no autopsy could silence. Each body was flown to Ulan-Ude for forensic analysis. The reports, official, dry, clinical, only deepened the mystery. 5 hikers were ruled dead from hypothermia. The 6th, Ludmila Korovina, had suffered sudden cardiac arrest. But then came the inconsistencies. The lungs of all 6 victims were bruised, a symptom not typically associated with cold exposure, but more often seen in drowning or chemical poisoning. 2 bodies showed elevated urea levels, a possible indicator of kidney failure brought on by extreme physical stress or toxic shock. Several showed signs of protein breakdown in muscle tissue, suggesting acute starvation, but they had food. They had just started their trip. How could they be starving? Then there was the foam. Pink froth in the mouths and airways of some victims. Blood in the stomachs. Evidence of vomiting. In one case, cerebral trauma, possibly from a fall, but with no matching external wounds. These details were quietly noted, marked atypical, and filed away. No follow-up, no deeper analysis. The official line was maintained: accidental deaths from exposure. But if that were true, then why did the autopsies read like a chemical horror show? Why were their bodies in such advanced states of breakdown after only a few days? And most chilling of all, why had the scene itself rejected life? No birds, no bugs, no decomposition. In the wilderness, death attracts life, insects, scavengers, even fungi. Yet the clearing was pristine, as if something in the environment had sterilized it. Search team members would later whisper about the atmosphere at the site, how they felt watched, how the air seemed heavy, how even their radios crackled with static. Nothing official was recorded, but every man who set foot on that mountain left with the same unease. This wasn't just a natural disaster. This place had been changed. And perhaps the most disturbing change was this. No one asked the obvious questions. Why was there no memorial? No formal press conference? Why didn't Russian authorities investigate further? The case was quietly closed, buried, filed away as solved, when every piece of physical evidence screamed otherwise. Even Dyatlov Pass, a case decades older, had received multiple reinvestigations, documentaries, forensic reviews, but not Khamar Daban. Not this one. Why? Some say it was due to bureaucracy. Post-Soviet Russia was chaotic. Resources were thin. Others suggest embarrassment, that the presence of a survivor complicated the story. Valentina's testimony couldn't be disproven, but it also couldn't be validated without revealing just how little science could explain. And still others believe the silence was intentional, that whatever killed the hikers was something the state didn't want to confront. And yet, the evidence remains, buried in medical records, scattered in faded photographs, stored in memories no one wants to revisit. Valentina never gave another interview after 2018. Her story faded again into silence. No other hikers have been reported dead in that precise location since. The mountain is open. People visit, camp, walk the same trails. They take photos and smile. But they don't know. They don't know what happened on that slope in August of 1993. They don't feel the absence. They don't hear the silence. But we do. We hear it because once you know the story, the silence gets louder. It's in the way the wind changes when you say her name. It's in the way no wildlife came near. It's in the way 6 bodies, hardened survivalists, fell in under 6 minutes and left behind no trace of fear, only stillness. And maybe, just maybe, that stillness wasn't natural. Maybe it was left behind, as a warning. Because the more you study the Khamar Daban case, the more one question refuses to die. If it wasn't the weather, if it wasn't poison, if it wasn't panic or mushrooms or misjudgment, then what was it? And that's where we must end. Not with answers, but with the only thing this story has given us from the start, the unknown. Because the conclusion of this story isn't closure. It's a door left open, a question without a period, a final, lingering breath before the silence begins again. But before we close the file completely, there's one final comparison we have to make. Because long before Khamar Daban, there was another case, another frozen slope, another group of experienced hikers, another cluster of impossible deaths, and no survivors. The Dyatlov Pass, the place where this mystery may have begun, or worse, where it may have never ended. This wasn't the first time Russia lost a group of young hikers under mysterious, unthinkable circumstances, and it wasn't the first time the story was buried in silence. 34 years before the Khamar Daban tragedy, in 1959, another expedition vanished into the snow-swept wilderness of the Ural Mountains. 9 hikers, strong, experienced, disciplined, were found dead near a campsite they had slashed open from the inside. Some were barefoot. Some had crushed bones. One had no tongue. The official report listed hypothermia, but the details told a different story. That case became known as the Dyatlov Pass incident, and it has haunted survival history for over half a century. No other case until now had mirrored its chaos, its brutality, its complete defiance of natural law. But in 1993, in a forest 2,000 miles away, it happened again. Both groups were young. Both were led by seasoned instructors. Both had high levels of physical training. Both had plans, gear, and support nearby. And both were struck down suddenly in remote, hostile terrain, without warning, without witnesses, and without answers. 2 disasters, 2 decades apart. And in both cases, silence followed. What connects them? In Dyatlov, hikers fled their tent half-dressed in sub-zero temperatures. Some died from exposure. Others had injuries with no external bruising, as if crushed by pressure. One had radiation traces on her clothing. Another's face had melted. Soviet authorities investigated, then closed the file with a single phrase: a compelling natural force. No details, no explanations, just that. In Khamar Daban, the deaths were even faster. 6 people collapsed within minutes. Seizures, bleeding, vomiting. Not one attempt to flee. No signs of a threat. Only a survivor too traumatized to speak. And a recovery site where even animals refused to go. And then the same reaction. A shallow investigation, followed by silence. These aren't just tragic accidents. These are rituals of disappearance, etched into the frozen ground of a country that has seen too many secrets swallowed by its forests. That's what makes the comparison so terrifying. Because if it happened once, maybe it was random. If it happened twice, then maybe something is repeating. Some believe there's a pattern, that the Soviet Union conducted covert experiments on weather, on sound, on nerve agents, in remote zones where people wouldn't survive to tell the story. Others suggest these are weak points in the fabric of the world, places where physics begins to bend and things leak through, places where nature isn't entirely natural. Both Dyatlov and Khamar Daban are marked by common anomalies: sudden, fatal disorientation, bizarre injuries inconsistent with environment, missing or removed clothing, physical stress with no external trauma, a complete absence of animal activity near the corpses, and above all, an atmosphere described by witnesses and rescuers alike as heavy, mute, unnatural. Some call these dead zones, places where logic stops working, places where the earth doesn't want people. In Russian folklore, there are tales of cursed valleys, winds that whisper, trees that steal your voice. Most dismiss them as superstition, until the body count starts. Valentina survived the Khamar Daban incident, but Dyatlov left no one behind. Everything we know about Dyatlov comes from photographs, journal entries, and the bodies themselves. With Khamar Daban, we had a witness, but her mind was fractured, two pieces of the same puzzle, one told from inside, the other from after. And still, no one knows what really happened. That's why the comparisons won't stop. Because if these two cases are connected, we're not just looking at accidents, we're looking at a phenomenon. One that kills cleanly, quickly, and leaves no witnesses who can speak. A force, a frequency, a silence, a message, and the most terrifying possibility, that it's not done, that it could happen again, that other hikers, other groups, walking those same trails beneath clear skies are one sudden sound, one wind gust, one wrong step away from vanishing. And this time, maybe no one will come back. But perhaps the scariest thought isn't that we'll never know what happened. It's that maybe someone does. Because Dyatlov was investigated by the Soviet military. Files were sealed. Witnesses were warned. Some bodies were found far too late. And in the case of Khamar Daban, the slowness of the response, the lack of media coverage, and the refusal to reopen the file all feel deliberate, not neglect, but strategy. Perhaps silence is safer than the truth. Perhaps someone learned what happened and chose to shut it down. And if that's the case, then we are dealing with something bigger than a survival story, bigger than a tragedy. We are dealing with something systemic, something hidden, something they don't want remembered. But memory is stubborn, especially when it bleeds. Today, the Khamar Daban Trail remains open. Tourists still walk its ridges. Locals still talk about that year. But there's no sign, no plaque, no cross, just trees, rocks, wind, and a silence that hums beneath your skin. Some say the forest has forgotten. Others say it never forgets. But we remember. And now so do you. Because the Khamar Daban incident is no longer just a file in a cabinet. It's a warning, one that echoes across mountains, across time, across stories like Dyatlov and back again. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone disappears into the mist, we'll remember what Valentina never said out loud, what she carried in her silence, and what her eyes have never stopped seeing. Because long after the screams fade, the mountain keeps watching. And it's always waiting for someone to come back. Someone who shouldn't. In the end, maybe the most terrifying part of the Khamar Daban incident isn't the deaths. It's the silence that followed, the unanswered questions, the contradictions no one wants to address. Because when science fails, when evidence twists in on itself, we're left with something far more unsettling than danger. We're left with doubt. And doubt doesn't just haunt the mountains, it follows you home. It creeps into your thoughts at 2 a.m. when you hear wind at your window or silence in the trees. But there's power in remembering, in keeping stories like this alive. Because the moment we stop asking questions, the moment we say, that's just how it is the moment the forest wins. So let me ask you, do you believe Valentina? Do you think this was a tragic accident or something else entirely? Comment your theory below. I read every one. And if this story shook you even a little, save it, share it, or better yet, subscribe for more real-life horror stories that blur the line between truth and the impossible. Because the next mystery might already be waiting, and the next survivor could be watching. Don't let this story disappear. Keep it alive. You're part of the investigation now.